This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Right. Yeah. Always on fire, I think you'll find.
Hey, thanks, and welcome to another Confessions podcast from your friends at Radio 2. We are your friends, aren't we?
I'm Matt's friend and your friend.
Yes, we're everyone's friend.
This is where sinful members of the public come to tell their tales of deceit, debauchery and deception, and then we all laugh at them. This week's collection includes Patricia's confession, to cut a long story short, the wrong patient one. Ouch.
A jugful.
Yes, exactly.
A jugful.
I'll have a jugful, please.
Yeah.
Olivia's misdemeanour, last train to London, the London trip. There wasn't a London trip. M's incredible tale, baby, what a big surprise. The umbilical cord.
Yes. Oh.
Plus another tale we've unearthed from the confession script. First, we start with Paul's confession. This is Chive Talking.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast. Please be seated.
Dear Father Mayo and the drive time justices of Radio 2, all three of whom are here gathered and assembled. Tonight's one, by the way, called Chive Talking.
Oh.
It was a good title, so we thought it was worth mentioning again. Your feature on crisp butties last week pricked my conscience and reminded me of a cruel prank I played 26 years ago, and one which still haunts me to this day. It's the summer of 1991, and a time when I had a vegetable patch full of, even though I say it myself, very healthy potato plants. I had fabulous potatoes, the best in the area. Also at this time, it was being reported in the press that a prominent royal was suggesting we talk to our plants to assist their growth. These two issues inspired me to play a trick on my 3-year-old niece Rachel, and it's to her that I owe a long overdue apology. Now, you may remember that in the mid-1980s there was a very popular TV advert for a make of crisps, an ad that had potatoes singing a catchy tune, modelled on the song I Want to Be Bobby's Girl, a hit for Susan Moore in 1963. Singy potatoes, these are. Okay, so you may well remember that particular ad campaign. Now, at the time my tale takes place, this advert was no longer featured on television, and clearly finding an old advert on YouTube just wasn't done in 1991. But I was determined in my plan, so I therefore acquired a dictaphone, inserted some nearly spent batteries. This is a very kind of elaborate process here. Some batteries that were almost done. So it recorded very, very slowly. And after leaving a 30-second gap at the beginning, I then recorded myself singing the words to that advert, which you just heard, over and over and over again. Finally, I got rid of the old batteries and I placed new fully charged batteries into the dictaphone. And hey presto, when the recording was played at normal speed, my voice went high-pitched and sounded just like the ad, which you just heard. Aware that my niece was visiting one evening that week, I made sure I was in the garden by the potato plants when they arrived. I was armed with the dictaphone, a piece of brown paper, a watering can for myself, and a child's watering can decorated with flowers, perfect for my little niece to use. Placing the dictaphone in the midst of the plants and covering it with brown paper, I watched her arrive and then pretended to water the potatoes. Uncle Paul, Uncle Paul, she says. It's a 3-year-old voice. What else can I do? What are you doing? Rachel says, as she skipped down the garden to join me. I'm skipping. I'm watering my thirsty potato plants, I say, but I've actually run out of water. I then told her that when the potato plants are happy, sometimes their potatoes start to sing, especially when they've had a nice drink of water. I also said that when this happens, it's nice to sing along with them. In fact, it's a very respectable and respected thing and shows that you respect the potatoes. Passing Rachel the child's watering can, I asked her to start watering some plants a few feet away, enabling me to switch the dictaphone on unnoticed. I then made an excuse to go up the garden to fill my can, and the 30-second delay at the start of the recording gave me just enough time to walk away before this happened. So by the time I'd walked to the water butt and returned, my niece was now singing along with the potatoes and actually stroking their leaves and smiling. She then ran inside my home to her parents and excitedly told them about Uncle Paul's famous singing potatoes. and they just smiled and exchanged humouring glances. Their glance at me seemed to suggest that's the last time we'll let her spend any time with this idiot. I later confessed my deception to my brother and sister-in-law, who, while they thought it was a cruel trick, didn't destroy the magic for my niece by telling her the truth. I later learned, because these things always have implications, I later learned that Rachel had drawn pictures of the singing potatoes the next time she was at nursery, and she told all the other children and staff about them. Of course potatoes can sing. Don't you know anything? Come on. I've heard them and I've seen them sing. I have.
Terry Jones again.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It was a little bit. She apparently said all this with enough conviction that the staff actually reported her to her mother. Why would you? Obviously, she appeared so convinced that the potatoes were singing that they had a word. Anyway, very strange. But it is high time, says Paul. I need forgiveness for this prank that I played, which caused me much amusement at the time, but resulted in my niece, who is now an adult and mother herself, spending many of her early years believing that potatoes were actually alive and not just vegetables, but they could sing under the right circumstances. And by the way, my favourite crisp butty is wholemeal bread, real butter, and cheese and onion crisps. That would be my favourite. Well, that's Nigel giving his. What do you think about that as that mixture, particularly wholemeal bread, real butter, and cheese and onion?
Yeah, real good type of Welsh butter, and I love cheese and onion crisps. They're my favourite. So
why haven't you ever done a cheese butty?
A cheese or a
crisp butty.
Crisp butty.
Why have you done a crisp butty for us?
Yeah, I feel as if I might be doing one quite soon.
Okay. just thought. Do you want to go first then, Nigel?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, please. Now, I have a feeling that Rachel might well have twigged this. I'm just staggered, but Rachel, I'm presuming she is still speaking to Paul, Uncle Paul, that is, because she's 29 years old now, yeah. But I thought that might have come up in the conversation over all these years, unless he's been completely verboten from the family. But I do. In Ireland, there is a place called Tato Park, and there's Tato Man.
Yeah.
And there is there's a whole theme park. So, potatoes you can't scoff. And I thought that was really dynamic of Uncle Paul and also creating the magic. So you're absolutely forgiven. The person I'm not forgiving is the people at the play area, the kindergarten or whatever it was, who were reporting them for her. A
little bit dodgy, wasn't it? Really?
Saying that Uncle Paul and they were talking potatoes. I mean, we've got to indulge people. She's 3 years old, for heaven's sake. So you're definitely forgiven.
Maybe potatoes can sing. Actually,
maybe they can.
Do we know that they can't, Bobby? Have you ever asked?
This is my point is with the nursery people as well, because actually the nursery people don't know that they can't just because they've never heard. Yep. The conditions have to be right, and the nursery people obviously never get the conditions right. Uncle Paul does. That's why Rachel got her special performance, because she got it right with Uncle Paul. So really, Uncle Paul, you don't need forgiveness. It is absolutely fine. You should continue to do this.
Are there any vegetables that can sing, Matt, as far as you know?
Not to my knowledge, but then I've never been there. I'm going to say, isn't it? Does no one else find it a bit odd that you've got potatoes who are singing about being crisps? Looking forward to they're going to be chopped up and fried,
boiled, alive.
Let's all sing about that. That's okay. I'm going to forgive just because of the phrase "respect my potatoes." I am going to be using that phrase quite a lot from now on to my family when I'm out in the garden. Respect my potatoes,
and so
therefore forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Sage Simon and the brethren of the reasonable and the righteous, my tale takes you back to the early 90s, where as an over-enthusiastic student nurse, it's from Patricia, Patricia.
Got to write it down, thank you.
An over-enthusiastic student nurse, so automatically you know what territory we're in. You know what student nurses are like, they've got all these stories, and this is one of them. I was enjoying my first foray into a male surgical ward. Our training was mainly see one, do one, teach one. That's how it broke down. More often than not, a gang of student nurses let loose on patients, while the already qualified nurses and ward sisters stayed in the office to do paperwork, which is basically drinking tea and eating toast, different times, and certainly not something that is done today, adds Patricia. This particular day, we received our handover and were sent out onto the ward to look after our pre- and post-operative patients. With a list of patients in our care and a theatre list, we knew who was having what and in what order. So I excitedly went off to put all my classroom teaching into practice, admit the patient, take a full history, and get the gentleman prepared for surgery. For some, it was as simple as compression stockings and a theatre gown. For others, a lot more preparation was needed.
Okay.
Why have you got your hands in... Both of you have your hands in front of your mouths.
Yeah.
Patient number 1 was Mr. Smith, who, given the fact that he was having quite a major operation to have something removed, seemed quite relaxed. Anyway, to start my part of the procedure, I handed him a jug of laxative to ensure his bowel was empty, ready for surgery.
A
Unbelievable.
jug.
A jug of
A jug.
A jug of
A jug of laxative.
Goodness me.
She hasn't started yet. Next was a shave. A nipple to knee, as we called it in the business, which meant no hair anywhere within that zone, and all done with an NHS-provided disposable razor.
Lovely.
No swivel head to be found, no triple-bladed beauties, just a single blade, probably sharpened on the back step of someone's nan's house. Personally, I wouldn't use the razor on my own legs, says Patricia, let alone the full body exfoliation I was about to undertake on the poor man in front of me. However, Mr. Smith was fully accepting of his fate and continued to sip away
And his jug.
while I set to work with a bowl of water, some cheap soap, and a pile of rather blunt razors. What a picture you paint. Mr. Smith was considerably hairy. Let's just say Tom Jones would have had some strong competition in the hairy chest stakes. And after a considerable amount of time, I stood back, quite pleased with my efforts. Mr. Smith was now completely shorn, at least between nipple and knee, anyway, which is what it said. With everything now ticked off the list for Mr. Smith, I went up to write up my excellent job in his notes. And it was at this horrendous moment in time, as I was flicking through Mr. Smith's notes, page by page, I realised Mr. Smith was not Mr. Smith at all. He was, in fact, Mr. Smythe, with a Y, not an I. Mr. Smythe wasn't going to theatre the following day for a major operation to have something taken out.
No.
Mr. Smythe didn't need a jug of laxative.
Does anyone? I mean,
Mr. Smythe didn't even need his moustache shaved, let alone the mass scalping of body hair I had just completed. Mr. Smythe was due to have what is known in the medical profession as a Zadex procedure. In layman's term, the surgical excision of an ingrowing toenail, which involves a theatre gown, 10 minutes in the theatre, home a couple of hours later with a bandaged toe. Thank you very much indeed. Have a box of chocolates. What on earth had I done? Panicking, I interrupted the qualified nurses as they finished their third pot of paperwork. What was their sage advice? Go apologise to Mr. Smythe and start the whole procedure again with Mr. Smith. I went back to Mr. Smythe, pulled the soundproof curtains around him, and proceeded to apologise for the torture I had put him through, whilst quickly whipping the remaining drips of the laxative liquid out of his hands. Amazingly, Mr. Smythe was very understanding, even when the other chaps around him could hear my grovelling apology and were laughing rather loudly at his predicament. So, my wise and wonderful collective, I don't seek forgiveness from Mr. Smythe, who quite frankly should have said something and questioned the reasons for the laxative. What? It's my toe. What? And so on. And the shave. Why? I'm just having my toe. You haven't even shaved my toe. Heaven's sake. I also don't seek forgiveness from the trained nurses, bogged down with pots and pots of paperwork that I interrupted with my stupidity. But obviously I need forgiveness from Mrs. Smythe, who would have had to put up with a husband who probably was in the loo far more regularly than would be normally required if you've had a surgical excision of a toenail. It doesn't normally affect the bowel. And for no doubt, constant complaining about stubble rash in various places for the next few weeks. You can see Patricia's problem. She was just trying to do her best, but she got the wrong patient. I think there might be quite a few people going, yeah, actually, that happened to me. And there'll be anonymous texts and confessions coming in. Sister Bobby, what do you say there?
Patricia, well done for confessing, because you did have to apologise and confess, and of course you had to do it all again. But you say you're not seeking for Mr. Smythe's
well, why
forgiveness.
didn't he say anything?
Well, because the thing is when you go into hospital and you're on the hands of professionals and more experienced people and authority, you generally don't, and it's what most people feel. Basically, you put yourself in there and you don't ask questions, because of course they know more than you, and it might be a new procedure in the operating theatre that you don't know.
Well,
They might be able to tell you. But
what would
anyone
laxative
goes in.
and a full body shave.
Did he say?
For my toenail!
This is the new thing we do, Mr. Smythe. For the ingrown toenail,
You'll find
need
it really
this jar
works.
of laxative.
You don't need this hair.
And also, Patricia, you didn't use any shave gel on him, so that must have been a
bit of
really
soap.
rough shave. Bit of soap, it's not enough, I think. So for no shaving gel, and for also getting the person wrong, because actually the potential of this could have been awful. Maybe it was a good lesson for you, but I said the potential could have been much,
No
much
nurse,
worse.
I said remove his spectacles. One of those. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I was
goodness
thinking.
me.
Yes.
It's the two Ronnies all over again.
So, Patricia, you own, although hilarious, and I don't know how Matt and I made it through there, I have to say, is you're not forgiven. But great
Matthew.
story.
Well, we're definitely forgiven because you've managed to get laxatives into a confession.
Which is
they never
unbelievable.
ever get on. They never get
But
on.
this is
so-
done for medical reasons.
Obviously, you know, apart from the fact that it's a jar of them, I still can't get my head around why you would need. I mean, surely just the one, but maybe you want to be extra sure that there's nothing left. But really, I mean, okay. So I'm going to forgive because laxatives, never not funny.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Thanks to Patricia for that. To cut a long story short, which had both Bobby and Matt with their heads in their hands. Still to come, the confession immediately forgiven by empathising parents like Anita here. We went to Lapland to see Santa when our kids were small. They still talk about it.
Oh yeah.
Actually, it was Centre Parks.
Hey.
Their Lapland experience, and the 5k we saved went towards a granite kitchen worktop, says Anita, which I'm sure is
genius.
so consoling.
Yeah. See that one?
I know you didn't go to Lapland, but look at that top.
Look what it paid
Very
for.
nice. Also, the confession that prompted this thought in the People's Verdict. It's at times like this I ask myself, what would Dr. Foster do?
Probably best not.
Thank you, Jay. Anyway, now it's time to head to the parish notice board. Here's a couple of new bits and pieces on it from the podcast post bag. It's the usual mix of praise, indifference.
Really?
Yeah. Classic confession requests and continued pleas for an after hours podcast.
Yes.
Marie's one of the latest people to review our podcast, and she says, my vote is also for an 18 certificate version. I would have a great confession involving a fur-length coat,
Yes.
a lift, and a middle-of-the-night visit from security.
Ooh.
What, a fur-length coat? Now, that's either
it'd be a full-length fur coat.
Yes. Should we say that that's what it is?
Yes, that is
I
what
think
it
that's probably
is,
what it
yes.
is.
Yeah.
Simon Trafford on Twitter is concerned after hearing last week's confession from the crypt. We need to know what happened after the Dorset confession. It's about the man who made up his job so he could move to his favourite area. As I recall, we tried to find out, and we failed spectacularly. Sarah texted in to say, Simon, the Confessions podcast is the only thing that keeps us sane on a 3-hour journey to Norfolk to visit the in-laws. Thank you, never stop.
Never.
Sandra on the email, just thought I'd let you know that I love your... This is basically me reading praise.
Yes. Well, it gets on.
Love the podcast. I've taken to downloading them to listen while swimming in the morning on my waterproof MP3 player.
Really? Is there such a thing?
Is that safe? You
But
don't
where
wanna-
do you strap it? Do you tuck
must-
it in?
Yeah, well, you'd have to,
Maybe into your hat, but I was thinking, is it safe? Because if
Into
you're
your
laughing
hat.
out loud, you might take on water.
Anyway, the lifeguards are on to me now. Thank you for brightening my day whilst doing lengths. There's also a notice I found here on the parish notice board to say that if you're a devout member of the Listening Collective, then we ask you to please subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcast platform. That way you won't have to seek the new podcast out each week. It'll just come to you.
Yeah.
Delivered straight to your MP3 thing. And another message from Confused Joan. So maybe it's time to start a regular Confused Corner with Confused Joan. She says, it's me again. I want to give you a 12-star rating. The podcast is hysterical and I love the old confessions. They're the best bit. Cat Flap Lady, 10 out of 10. Fat Baby, off the scale.
Yeah.
Due to Father Simon's laughing fit, I do think us listening friends of the show should get a petition to get them pesky blacklisted ones played. Thank you for brightening the long Friday winter evenings for us all. It's not winter just yet. Anyway, before we head back to the confessional booth, it's time for Matt's favourite bit of the podcast, the non-compliant confessions that have no chance at all of ever getting on the radio at tea time. The confession from Ulysses,
Wow.
already not forgiven,
Definitely.
about accidentally breaking off a certain part from a male nude statue in a nightclub and then placing it somewhere unsuspecting in probably a clubber's handbag, I
Oh,
think.
right. So
It might-
that's not too bad, is it?
It might have
Shall
been
we?
big, but it's not clever.
Fair enough. Okay. Steady, everyone.
On a similar
Come on,
theme, Rob's
please.
tale of his nude life modelling days.
Oh, yeah.
And why he had to run out mid-portrait. I'm afraid there actually isn't a euphemism we can reach for to explain why you scarpered. But needless to say, It too is unbroadcastable.
This is what we all know.
Another one for the definitely don't try this at home file. Mike, your confession about wrapping an annoying colleague at Heathrow in bubble wrap and then putting him on the baggage carousel to go round in front of passengers is not funny.
No, we don't find that funny.
Is just shocking.
Yeah.
We're also definitely not forgiving Constable Andy, who offered a lift to a grieving relative, forgetting that just 10 minutes before he'd left a rather big smell in the car. Thanks.
10 minutes, though. Goodness me, open a window.
Anonymous, it's fair to say we've never quite heard a story like yours involving a run-over squirrel that came back to life in your car whilst the hitchhiker was in the passenger seat. Apparently the hitchhiker then let the squirrel out, only for it to be knocked down again.
That's not
Bad
funny.
day.
Actually, that's not funny.
That's not
You're
funny,
quite,
man.
quite right, Bobby.
Fatally this time.
Definitely not funny.
The ending
Not
about
funny.
your niece finding the squirrel in your freezer whilst looking for an ice lolly was the final nail in the squirrel's coffin in terms of this getting used. Why would you put a squirrel?
Oh, just stop the car. Better put that in the freezer.
Just in case.
Just in case.
And the least compliant confession of the week goes to Dan, a man who was so petrified of spiders, he decided a blowtorch was a good way to get rid of one in the kitchen. Cut to 10 minutes later, and the fire brigade are putting out the blaze.
Goodness me.
I've heard of this before. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, none of those are getting on ever. If you'd like to get in touch, though, with a podcast or a post bag or anything that you want to just tell us about how great we are, confessions@bbc.co.uk. So back to this week's confessions. Time to revisit Olivia's misdemeanour, which got LC on the Twitter machine saying, a very funny confession on the Simon Mayo show yesterday. I spoke to Olivia today. She's glad for the forgiveness. Here is Olivia's story, last train to London.
The Confessions Podcast.
To the venerable Father Simon and your team of human moral compasses.
Oh, yes,
That's
we are.
about right. There is no hope for any of us. A couple of years ago, my work often took me to London. And coming from Plymouth, this usually involved an overnight stay, during which time my then 4-year-old daughter would get palmed off on long-suffering relatives. And as she hated me leaving, she would have to be peeled from me in floods of tears. I hated it too, and often set off to London teary-eyed myself. When I returned, inevitably I'd be clutching yet more tat. Souvenirs from the Paddington shop in a desperate bid to alleviate my guilt for abandoning her again. Books, toys, pillows, T-shirts, you name it, she now boasts quite a collection of guilt-soaked Paddington memorabilia. Anyway, you could say that London was a big deal for my daughter. She used to beg and plead me to take her with me one day so she could meet the now idolised Paddington in the furry flesh. Spotting an opportunity to make my own life easier, I told her that when she could walk for more than 5 minutes without whinging, I'd take her on her very first trip to the Big Smoke. This is
Brilliant.
classic parenting in
love it.
action.
Well done.
You could have just said, I'll give you £1. That usually works. She hastily agreed, and when a few months later I was able to make it all the way around the supermarket with her without the constant moaning about achy legs, I knew it was time to deliver on my promise. The day finally arrived, my daughter packed her little rucksack, and with barely a wink of sleep the night before from the excitement of it all, off we headed to the train station. Now, while excitedly sitting on the train and tucking into our lunch snacks, which is what you do immediately you get on the train, obviously, I began to receive worried texts from my mum and sisters, each of whom had heard on the news that there was a security alert in the capital. Father Simon, this is where my plea for forgiveness actually begins. Now, I'm not proud of this, but I started to feel a little panicked inside. My maternal instincts were now pinging off this way and that, and I was beginning to feel uneasy about being in Paddington Station at a time of high security with my precious little girl. I realise how daft this sounds now, but as a self-confessed bumpkin from Devon, I just wanted to head straight back home. But going home was not going to go down well, and I was faced with a real dilemma. We alighted the train at the next stop, Exeter St David's, and I was just preparing to break the bad news to her that London would have to wait for another day, when I noticed there was a strange spring in her 4-year-old step that stopped me in my tracks. "Hello, London dog," she called to a passing puppy. "Hello, London lady," she called to the passing puppy's owner, confusing her greatly. "Hello, London," she shouts. I should say at this point, how fortuitous it was that my darling daughter had not yet learned to read or indeed question me. And so it dawned on me that she thought we were actually already in London. And so taking a deep breath, I just sort of went along with it. And the deceit just kind of escalated from there, really. So off we jolly well trotted to Buckingham Palace, which was Exeter Cathedral.
Okay.
A quick spin around the Natural History Museum, which was the Royal Albert Memorial Museum, before having our picnic lunch and an ice cream in Hyde Park. What could be better? Well, it was Northern Hay Gardens, actually. We even happened to bump into my friend and her little boy, who lived in Exeter, but were, it was hastily agreed, just passing through London for the day. What are the chances? We bought a smart new pair of London boots from a well-known discount fashion store. We even managed to get to Hamley's Build-A-Bear, which my daughter said was slightly smaller than she'd expected, to buy a stuffed reindeer or something like that, because sadly the Paddington shop was closed. Well, all that walking and sightseeing was tiring, so off we went to our hotel, the Chorus Hotel, Hyde Park, which was, of course, the Premier Inn in Exeter.
Of course.
But she didn't notice that. Yes, Father Simon, I did indeed pay for another hotel room that night in order to cover my devious tracks. It was without doubt the most expensive trip to London I had ever not made. We headed home the next morning, she full of her proud tales of our grand day out in London, clutching evidence for show and tell at school the next day. I've no idea how her poor teachers handled that one, but I guess they probably concluded that I was just a bit mad. And so my fate was sealed, and to this day we speak of the momentous day that she went to London for the first time ever. My friends and family are in on the joke, and nobody's able now to mention London without putting it in air quotes. My daughter is now 6.5 and still doesn't know that she's never been to London. Or London.
Yes.
Did that work?
Yeah.
One day she will discover, well, probably today, what a deceitful mother I truly am. But for now, she lives in ignorant bliss. She does ask me from time to time why it is that there are areas of Exeter that children are not allowed to go to. But other than that, it does seem as though I've got away with it for now. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness not from my daughter for pulling the wool over her eyes, although I'm sure I have some serious grovelling to do when my cover is finally blown. What you mean like now, Olivia? But from the good people of London, who on learning of my self-spun web of deceit would quite rightly consider me a massive wimp for taking such drastic action to avoid the whole of London, because I'm a scaredy cat. But try telling me you'd have done anything different and come clean, wiping that gorgeous smile from my daughter's face. Well, quick thinking, get off the train immediately, you're suddenly in Exeter. Maybe it could double up as London if you try very hard. The answer is yes, Sister Bobby. What do you make of this?
Well, it's quite easy, I suppose, because you've got the Maritime Museum as well. You could say you're on the Thames, couldn't you? And there's some boats. I think I'm just trying to think, what's at Exeter? Which boat's at Exeter? You could say you're at Greenwich. I suppose you could get away with it. There's ways of getting away with it.
If you can't read and you don't question anything.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things missing, but she doesn't know. The only thing I've got a problem with is the show and tell. Because there might have been another child that went, that's not London, it looks like this, or something like that. So you did very well to get away with that.
How would they have spoken?
I can't do that again. It
was that your kind of Exeter voice? It's not London.
Well, it's just another voice. That's not London. She could have been exposed and she might have been very, very upset. But do you know what? I'd have done. I thought it was great. I wouldn't have been on it to say, yeah, this is London. So well done for
Quick
just
thinking.
going, actually, yes, this is London. So completely forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Yes, the key quote, I think, in this confession was, she was too young to read or question me. Oh, how I hanker back to the days when they weren't capable of independent thought.
Clean your room. Oh, all right then.
Yeah, yes, I will clean my room. And this is obviously pretty inspiring as well, because the very idea you could tell your children, we are going to Disneyland, and then just take them, in the train for half an hour, and you get out somewhere and go, this is Disneyland. Not as good as I thought it would be, but still, it's Disneyland. Save myself hundreds. So I am definitely going to forgive.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon, both fantastic and forgiving, the beautiful, benevolent Bobby, and magnificent and masterful.
Well
Matt.
done. Yes, forgiven.
Thanks very much. Goodbye. My confession dates back to that wonderful time in any couple's lifetime when your first child is due and you still live in that utopian world of a social life, the ability to do what you want, when you want, and relative freedom. The build-up to our first child had actually It's a relatively easy pregnancy, really. We visited the planned hospital and its maternity ward. We joined the NCT groups and have learnt that a woman crossed is a force of nature. Eventually the day of truth arrived after what felt like an eternity of expanding tummy, exhaustion, sleepless nights and scheming. As it happened, we had family over and enjoyed a lovely evening of catching up over a birth-inducing curry. This is a kind of a well-known thing. This is what people do. Husband was on strict instructions not to drink in case he was needed later for driving me to the hospital, and we all discussed the pending arrival with great excitement. But as we were still 3 days away from my due date, I stupidly thought that as this was my first, it was likely to be late, if anything. We eventually retired to bed at a relatively late for us 10:30 p.m, and although I had been feeling a little peculiar and stomach fluttering most of the day, I thought little of it as I drifted off to sleep. At midnight, I woke to severe stomach pains, which I initially thought might be the curry, but after several contractions, I woke my husband and barked at him to contact the hospital. The contractions built incredibly quickly, and within an hour we're on our way to the maternity ward, my hubby a little less full of his japes as we made the 15-minute journey in. This was probably brought on by tiredness, but also this sudden dawning that he would have to grow up and be a responsible parent at last. Although he did slip in a comment along the lines of, typical, you couldn't have waited until the morning to go into labour, could you? Blimey. Now, without wanting to spoil the birthing process for any listeners who may be due to go through this themselves, says Em, I didn't personally enjoy child labour that much.
Really?
I mean, child labour actually...
that's something else,
That
isn't it?
means when you employ a child for no money. But anyway, I think what Em means is the whole process of labour in general and giving birth, I didn't really enjoy it. Through the pain, I had also weirdly transformed into Mike Tyson. And mid-contraction and hug with my husband, I actually bit down on his right ear and had left significant bite marks. However, this is not what I need to confess about, though. It's not a bad
Even
start.
worse than that.
You see, in the whole planning process of the birth, hubby and I had discussed cutting the umbilical cord, a magical moment where a father separates child from its mother to go out into the world unplugged, so to speak. Well, at least it should be, because after 8 hours of labour and after the inevitable cheap jibes that neither myself or the attending midwives found funny, the scene was finally set for my cunning plan against my husband. Scissors in hand and poised like a royal about to open a museum wing, my darling husband stands over me with a wonderful mixture of pain, anxiety and concern across his face. He leans forward and starts to cut. But just as he does so, I muster all the remaining strength inside me and shout as loudly as I can, "Ow! Ow! 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 No! Ow!" I can still picture the look of absolute despair and dread as my husband panics, looking up from his scissor work to the midwives for an explanation. What has he done? What have I done? That's not supposed to happen. The midwives looked at each other, then across to me, and could see the broad grin painted across my now laughing face as my revengeful deed had been done. "Got you," I exclaimed as husband dropped the scissors and nearly started to cry again. To be honest, I don't really seek forgiveness for my husband who had it coming to him. I have dined out on this story ever since, and I have to say the midwives also thought it was hilarious. It did somewhat frustrate me that when we had our second child, I couldn't play this joke on my husband again. However, he may be daft, but I think he's not that daft. I do, however, seek forgiveness for any other expectant mums who were in earshot that morning for concerning themselves over the shenanigans going on in the cubicle next to theirs. It really doesn't hurt that much. Anyway, I'm just amazed that Em had the wherewithal to carry out a plan, having literally seconds before given birth to their first child, that she still wanted to stick to the plan and managed to say, "Got you." I mean, that is quite extraordinary. Anyway, so well done to Em. Let's see what Sister Bobby thinks there.
Yeah, as you say, what a fantastic couple you are. Because let's face it, you know, when life gets tough, you just throw comedy at it and hopefully that'll get you through. And you must be brilliant parents, I have to say. I think that's a really good story. Because right at the end, you're still taking the mickey out of each other. And
Who is going
that.
to actually go ahead with a practical joke, having given birth an 8-hour...
I love this woman.
Oh, my goodness me.
Inspired, completely forgiven. I just think it's one of my favourite stories ever.
Force of
well
nature
done.
is absolutely right, Brother Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, if you dish it out, you've got to take it, haven't you? I have to say, when I had to cut the cord, it didn't feel like a magical moment. It felt like, I just want to get this right. Tell me exactly what I need to do. I've only been in charge of the gas and air and encouraging my wife and saying, just listen to the staff. They seem to know what they're doing. I don't. Am I cutting this in the right place? Oh.
And she didn't think to go...
But she had been on the floor. So, yeah, obviously, definitely forgiven.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
That was Em's umbilical cord themed tale, Baby What a Big Surprise, which concludes this week's batch of confessions. Let me know if you forgave anybody and send in yours, because heaven knows you've got loads. confessions@bbc.co.uk. And before we go, another treat from the confession script. This week, it's been requested by Richard Vase on Facebook and also Nikki via email. My favourite confession, Simon, was from around 2012 and involved someone in a queue of traffic who was determined not to let another car out of a junction. I recall it being broadcast in the same week that you had Ian Lavender on the show, because the podcast at the time was called Don't Tell 'Em, Pike. If you could please play that one again, I'd be very grateful. Well, Nikki and Richard, we dug it out from the crypt, and here it is, which we're calling Road to Nowhere.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the Collective, I write to you seeking forgiveness for a moment of, shall we say, travel tension 7 years ago, which I fear may otherwise haunt me for the rest of my days. See, it all started very badly on a Monday when Sally Traffic informed me that there was trouble on the A1, and this meant having to do the dreaded diversion through the centre of Leeds. Ordinarily, I wouldn't be too perturbed. However, I was already running late and had an important client meeting arranged, although I was quietly hoping for a force majeure would occur so it could be postponed. Ask Matt. After a relatively... That's it now. There's no more references to you, Sally, so you can relax. It's just that...
I thought I was going to start during the whole confession.
OK, I'll see if I can work you in.
Would you mind?
After a relatively free-flowing diversion, I then hit the city centre and gridlock ensued. You could see the frustration on drivers' faces, and mine was no different. Places to go, people to see, neither of which was going to happen imminently. I sat in a single-file traffic jam, which moved at the pace of an asthmatic turtle for what seemed like forever, until eventually there was some movement. I noticed further ahead that there was a road from the left where cars were waiting to pull out onto our carriageway, and so began the game of After You. Now, I'm sure everyone is aware of traffic jam etiquette. You let someone out, then the next vehicle waits to be let out by the car behind you. However, on this occasion, the etiquette gods were not playing ball. Are you aware of this etiquette? Would you say that's the fairly standard?
I think so. I think you have to kind of, unless they're being silly, in which case you wouldn't let them go through. But I think generally that's true.
This is the traffic jam etiquette of which Dean is telling us. After You, that's the game you play. You see, what happened is, as I got nearer to the junction ahead, it became my turn to let a car pull out, which I duly did with the globally recognised hand gesture of, well, go on then. Everything was fine until I noticed that the next car from the same junction was now sneaking forward. I thought to myself, well, surely he's not trying to pull out. Does he not know the rules? So I edged ever forward, but much to my dismay, so was this rule breaker. I caught his eye and decided to wave my finger, as if to say, no chance, pal, amongst other things. But to my amazement, he still crept forward. After a short game of accelerate, brake, we both seemed to hit the accelerator simultaneously, and before I knew it, we had collided. After taking a moment to assess what had just happened, the red mist descended. I approached his vehicle and unleashed a barrage of, "What the heck do you think you're doing?" And, "I let the car in front of you go out, not you." And, "Do you not know the rules?" And so on. And I'm ashamed to say, a few expletives may also have been thrown in for extra effect. Well, the driver of said vehicle appeared to remain calm. He wound down his window ever so slightly and motioned to me to come closer. At this point, my adrenaline was through the roof, and as I leant towards the window, I heard the words that will remain forever in my memory. "Did you not realise I'm being towed?"
Oh, superb.
So I seek forgiveness, Simon, not only from the helpless man who had to endure my misguided fury, but also from his 2 children who, unbeknownst to me, were in the back seat of the car and had to listen to the potty-mouth, annoyed man outside, who was Dean from Harrogate. Yours in hope. You can see and you can understand, because the rules are the rules. He was trying to sneak out. It's just he didn't really have much say in the matter. So here we go. Let's try Sister Rebecca for an understanding voice. Maybe.
This reminds, you know those signs that say "converge like a zip"? You know those signs? They should have had a sign there that said that, or something.
It doesn't say "converge like a zip."
What does it say?
Well, just...
Anyway, something like that. But I mean, it is a rule. But people often break these rules, don't they? And I think this actually shows that getting road rage for an incident like that, road rage where you are so angry you could, easily go and hit somebody, is really not the way forward.
No.
Much better just to go and politely have a word and take the moral high ground, I think. And I think, it's quite funny, actually, that he got his comeuppance. So I think, I can't ever... say it's okay to shout at someone, Dean, so I'm afraid you're not forgiven.
Well, you could shout at someone from the comfort of your own car.
Yeah, but swearing and going up to them threatening
No, that's not very nice. Not very nice at all. Anyway, yes, now we have the aforementioned Mother Superior.
Well, you have, Rebecca, just a little road knowledge for you. You have...
Oh,
yes.
Not patronising at all.
Yes, come on. Yes, actually, listen up now.
No, listen up. Listen up, Rebecca. You have converge signs when there are roadworks. This particular problem was caused by extra traffic going through an area because a road nearby was shut. So they wouldn't have put signs up for that. So they just
Obviously.
had to... They had to think on their feet, really. Just so you know.
Thanks for clearing that one up.
That's fine. And you see, I think road rage is I can't say I've never
Travel
had it.
tension, I called it.
Travel tension. I've had a bit of travel tension in my time because I've driven for miles. So I kind of understand. And no one likes to be made a complete fool of in the way that Dean was. But so, Dean, I don't know, you made the traffic jam worse by not looking ahead, by not thinking ahead. So I think on that basis alone, I can't forgive you.
It's all down to Brother Matthew, then.
I think this is superb. I was convinced he was going to be a priest, the guy in the other car. But anyway,
he may have made
anyone who's ever been in a car with me knows that I never, ever take the moral high ground. I am always bellowing at other people in other cars because, frankly, I behave like the street is mine and you're deigning to be in my way. So, Dean, I am definitely going to forgive you because you did what probably I would have done as well, and you provided an excellent punchline. The fact this guy's being towed, superb. Well done.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
And that was the confession from the crypt this week, featuring Rebecca?
Rebecca was in there.
Rebecca's in there, Sally, Traffic, and Matt was in there.
I was in there, yes, I'm always there.
Just getting in the way. I read it out, and I'd forgotten what the line is.
The punchline.
Yeah, the punchline.
And it's one of those ones where we've all done something really stupid and just gone, oh my word, I am the biggest idiot in the world ever.
Yeah, and if you got one of those, confessions at bbc.co.uk. Sister Bobby forgave 3 again this week, going soft. 78.5 to 79.5 not forgives. Matt, you forgave all 4 this week.
Correct.
What a total
Absolutely.
wuss.
Everybody wins. Who are we to cast the first stone?
If you made it to the end of the last podcast, I asked you to tweet successfully negotiated first tongue, which was a clerical thing and funny at the time. Thank you, Louise, Mike, Lucy, Liz, Robin and loads more did just that. This week's code phrase has to be, I'll have a nipple to knee, please, Barbara. Remember to subscribe, and don't forget you can hear the whole of the show every weekday from 5 on Radio 2. Thank you.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.